Welcome back everyone, this is Mihai and we're diving into the second episode of our monthly tech wrap-up. Thanks for joining me as we explore another batch of interesting projects, insightful tutorials and thought-provoking industry news. Now I'm still experimenting with this format, so bear with me as we fine-tune things. For example, this episode I will start with tutorial teardowns, then move on to the project spotlight section, and finally wrap up with the news section. I believe the new order creates a more engaging flow, starting with practical takeaways and then building towards broader industry perspectives. If you have any suggestions and feedback, feel free to drop a comment below, I'm all ears. Remember, we're covering a wide range of topics here, everything that can impact your tech career, from coding to open source software to self-hosting, the bigger picture in IT industry, and even soft skills. Before we get started with this month's episode, we are getting very close to 1.5k subscribers, so if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. So let's start with this article that's about the search capabilities of PostgreSQL. And I have to say, I really enjoy this article because it echoes a belief I held for a while now. You don't always need to jump straight to a dedicated search database like Elasticsearch or Apache Solr. Postgres' built-in full-text search engine is seriously powerful and can handle a surprising amount of search complexity and data volume. In my opinion, Postgres' full-text search engine is kind of a hidden gem. And here the article starts with mentioning a few good resources like Postgres is all you need, even for vectors, just use Postgres for everything, PostgreSQL is enough. And I have to admit, 95% of the cases I'm in the just use Postgres for everything camp. Okay, I'm just going to scroll over some sections about fuzzy search, fine-tuning search. I'll let you discover all those yourselves. However, there is a section in this article I want to take a look at in more detail. This section called "When should I look for alternative solutions?" And this mentions something called a BM25. And obviously this being Postgres, and even the author mentions it here, you can add this BM25 using Postgres extensions. That's the beauty of an open source software. But what exactly is BM25? Let's think about the hypothetical scenarios where you want to help people find the most relevant books when they're searching for something. Now, imagine you have two books, a massive encyclopedia packed with information about absolutely everything, and a short novel about a detective solving a mystery. Now, let's say someone searches for the word detective. Which book is more likely to be relevant? It's the short novel, right? But a simple word count might trick the search engine because the encyclopedia probably mentions the word detective a bunch more times. And this is just because it covers so many topics. Now here's where BM25 comes in. It considers the length of the document. It understands that longer documents are more likely to contain a given word, even if it's not super relevant, so it gives a slight advantage to shorter documents. In simple terms, BM25 tries to balance how often the search term appears in the document, how long the document is, and how common the search terms is in general. So yeah, before you grab Elasticsearch, check out these two PostgreSQL extensions to see if they fit your use case. So our second topic will be about GraphQL, and this reminded me I interviewed someone a while back, and this was back when GraphQL was the cool new thing. So we went over a system design hypothetical example, and naturally they picked the obvious choice for any system design problem, GraphQL. Then this person proceeded to design the perfect REST API that just happens to use GraphQL. So when I asked what does graph in GraphQL stand for, they drew a blank. So then I asked what are some downsides of GraphQL, to which they replied there aren't any, or something along those lines. What I was trying to get at was this exact topic of GraphQL security. Imagine someone designing an enterprise API and not understanding how to protect it, or even that it needs special care for security. Now, I'm not saying that GraphQL is bad, quite the contrary, I enjoy using it. However, we need to talk about GraphQL security. There is this thread on Reddit where developers are debating the pros and cons of GraphQL, and while there is plenty of praise here for the flexibility and developer experience, a recurring theme was the challenge of securing GraphQL APIs, and it seems even seasoned developers are having trouble with this. GraphQL's ease of use comes with the responsibility to understand its unique security landscape. So I downloaded this report on the state of GraphQL Security 2024 by Escape. So let's go over it. So GraphQL is still being adopted, which I think is a good thing, and they give us a couple of examples of security vulnerabilities found in enterprises. So Philips here used HTTP instead of HTTPS. Again, that's not really GraphQL specific issue. And then Zendesk had a couple of issues. One was an SQL injection on one of the GraphQL API, and the second was an access control issue. Again, both of these could have easily happened in REST APIs as well. Let's move on to this page on analysis of key vulnerabilities. Unrestricted resource consumption, security misconfiguration, broken function level authorization, server-side request forgery, unsafe consumption of APIs, improper inventory management, broken authentication. All of this seems like they could just as easily happen in REST endpoints. Except I guess this one, broken object property level authorization. However, the moral of this story is that because GraphQL queries are dynamic in nature, basically you can navigate relationships between objects, and it's impossible for developers to think about all the possible queries someone could send to the GraphQL API. This makes it harder to implement access control, so if you try to implement security like you would in REST, you are going to have a bad day. It really is a shift in how you need to think about security. So unrestricted resource consumption. This one is about rate limiting, but also more specific to GraphQL is depth limiting. You should not allow a deeply nested query that might just be too complex for your server to handle. And you definitely shouldn't allow infinitely recursive queries. So let me just show you how this would look like. Imagine you're querying this GraphQL endpoint and it provides you some resource called country. And then on country, we can get the country name and let's say continent. And then again on continent, we can get the name and then countries. And therefore countries, we can get again the continent and then again the countries and then again the continent and so on. And you can see you can easily create an infinitely recursive query with this. So definitely you should limit the depth of the query. Next, schema availability. If your GraphQL server isn't public, you should probably disable the schema introspection in production. If you don't know, GraphQL has an introspection schema that allows you to see all the fields, basically all the capabilities of a GraphQL API. This might be good for development environments, but you might want to disable it in production. Moving on to the recommendations, and this is the most important page for the report. It shows some GraphQL specific vulnerabilities, best practices, but also solutions using open source tools which can limit the depth of GraphQL queries, or another approach is to assign cost to GraphQL queries and limit queries based on the cost. And of course, dealing with the complex authentication and field level security required in GraphQL. As you may know, I started learning Go. And in fact, one of the latest videos on my channel is how I learned Go as a Node.js developer. So check that one out right after this one. As I progress through learning something, I want to tackle more and more complex topics, and nothing beats a good book for that. Here's the latest book I read. It's called Functional Programming in Go by Dylan Muse, and it's been a great read. You can check it out using the Amazon link in the video description. This book really hit home because it tackles some functional programming concepts I covered in an older video about JavaScript. If JS is your main language, definitely watch that video first to get the basics down before jumping into functional Go. Now what's interesting about both Go and JavaScript is that they share some traits that make functional programming possible, mainly functions as first-class citizens, so you can treat functions like any other variable. Closures, which means function remembers the variables from its surrounding scope. And higher-order functions. You can write functions that take other functions as arguments or return new functions. If any of these topics confuse you, like I said, watch my video on functional programming with JS. So even though Go might not scream functional programming at first glance, it definitely has the tools to let you write clean, testable and maintainable code in a functional style. And that's exactly what this book explores. Then I discovered this article written by Julia Evans about some of the initial gotchas that you might run into when starting with Go, especially if you're coming from a language like JavaScript. First topic in this article is how Go handles structs and the concepts of copying values when you assign them or pass them to functions. This is closely related to the subject of immutability, and it pairs nicely with the functional programming book I just mentioned earlier. Another thing she covers in her article is understanding the different types of method receivers. Again, another topic closely related to immutability. You can control what gets sent to the function with this star notation right here. You can either pass a value receiver or a pointer receiver. The pointer can mutate the original struct. If you pass the value, it won't mutate the original struct. This is extremely handy for writing clean functional code, and honestly way better than how this is handled in JavaScript. So if you're on your Go learning journey, definitely check both the book and Julia's article. And last but not least, a topic I've been experimenting with lately, and that is running LLMs locally. And shameless plug, one of these articles presented here was written by me for the NA10 blog. The idea of running LLMs locally in a nutshell is about running AI models on your own hardware instead of relying on cloud services. This gives you more control over your data, the privacy, and obviously the costs. The main thing here is that it allows you to experiment with AI without breaking the bank. Imagine using AI without the constant worry of cloud costs. That is the beauty of self-hosting. You can fine-tune models on your specific data, build custom applications, and truly unlock the potential of AIs without relying on external providers. In my article, I go over some popular software to run and manage local LLMs, and a short tutorial on how to integrate Ollama and NA10. So yeah, if you want some inspiration, definitely check out my article on this topic. I'm currently playing around with Ollama and NA10, trying to create some AI-powered automations. The idea is to use AI models with NA10, since NA10 allows you to integrate with countless other applications and services. And they provide this nice AI starter kit, which is actually a Docker Compose file, which will start up NA10, Ollama, and Quadrant, which is an open source vector database. Those are all the tutorials today. Moving on to the project spotlight section, we'll be looking at a bunch of projects, starting with MirrorD. This is a tool that helps cloud developers interact with remote services like they would with services running on localhost. I'm expecting this to fix a couple of problems I have. One is the problem of I don't have staging data on my local machine, and second, I wanted to improve the development workflow, specifically the continuous delivery aspect. For now, I'm still experimenting with MirrorD, but I hope it will solve the previously mentioned problems. I'm planning on doing a full video walkthrough on setting up and using MirrorD, so please subscribe for that. Next up in our project spotlight, we're talking about Postgres, and specifically an exciting feature in version 12. If you're not familiar, Postgres is a fantastic tool that automatically generates a RESTful API based on your Postgres database. The beauty of Postgres is its simplicity and efficiency. You define your data models and relationships in your database, and Postgres handles the rest, pun intended. It creates a performant API that lets you interact with the data. No need to write a ton of custom backend code, no need to wrestle with complex ORMs. I believe the most important feature in version 12 is this Prometheus metrics added here, which helps you monitor the service on the /metrics endpoint. Postgres is promoting a vision that I agree with, and that is database as the single source of truth. It generates the API and lets you focus on what matters most, your data and application logic. And since Postgres has a bunch of features that help you with the application logic, such as views, functions, row-level security, just to name a few, the idea that you could build the bulk of your application logic directly in the database is not that much of a stretch. So if you're working with PostgreSQL, do yourself a favor and check out Postgres. It might just change the way you think about database schemas and how you build backend APIs. Next up is FlexMeet, an open source feature flagging and remote config service. Now, if you ever dealt with the headache of coordinating feature releases, A/B testing, or gradually rolling out new functionality, this might just be the tool for you. You can simplify all of that using feature flags. With feature flags, you can test new features with specific user groups, experiment with different configurations, and even roll back changes instantly if something goes wrong. Flagsmith makes it easy to create and manage feature flags, and what's great about it is that it's open source and you can self-host it on your own infrastructure. Or if you prefer a hassle-free experience, they offer a hosted version too. I'm a big fan of tools that empower developers to ship code with confidence, and Flagsmith is exactly that. Next we have Naive UI, a Vue 3 component library that's caught my eye recently. What impressed me the most about Naive UI is its completeness. It feels like they really thought about everything. And yeah, you know from the previous episode, I like a good date picker. And this one definitely has a bunch of options. I also like data tables with expandable rows, check. And not only is this library complete, but it's quite stylish. It's definitely worth checking out if you're building Vue 3 applications and looking for a comprehensive, well-designed UI library. Alright, it's time for our final section, and that is the industry news roundup. And there's only one piece of news I found interesting this month, and again, it's AI related. The European Union AI Act is here. This article by Alvaro Montoro does a great job breaking down the key points of the Act, including its focus on risk assessment, transparency, and human oversight. I think it's a big deal. The EU AI Act is one of the first major attempts to regulate AI on a large scale. It's a bold move that could set a precedent for other countries and regions. While there are valid concerns about potential overregulation, I think it's important to have some guardrails. The key takeaways for developers are: the Act places a strong emphasis on risk assessment, so developers will need to carefully consider the potential risks and implications of their AI systems. The AI system will need to be transparent and explainable. That means that developers will need to be able to explain how their system works and why it made certain decisions. So no more it's a black box, we don't know how it works. And lastly, this act emphasizes the importance of human oversight of AI systems. This means that developers will need to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to allow humans to intervene if necessary. I think the European Union usually gets things right for the most part, but what do you think? Is this a step in the right direction? Comment down below. And that wraps up another episode. I hope you find these insights valuable and discover some new tools and ideas to explore. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're very close to 1.5k subs. Until next time.